So, hello and welcome to Fuel Poverty Action series of monthly learning sessions. Fuel for Thought, from fuel poverty to climate justice. For those of you who don't know, Fuel Poverty Action is a group of ordinary people that are fed up with being robbed by greedy energy companies through spiraling bills and rip-off repayment meters. And we campaign to protect people from fuel poverty. We challenge rip-off energy companies and unfair policies that leave people to endure cold homes, and we take action for warm, well-insulated homes that are clean and affordable energy that's under the control of people and communities, not private companies. And this space, Fuel for Thought, is our place where we come to share research and lived experience, tackle lies and clear up confusion as we ask and answer questions with experts, activists, and campaigners. And this month, with May Day only a couple of weeks away, we thought we'd take the opportunity to talk about unions. It's something we haven't done up until now, so it feels quite special, quite unique. What have unions done for us? Given us weekends, sick pay, holiday pay, parental leave, the minimum wage, decent working conditions, and the welfare state are just a few of the things we've got unions to thank for. But for the last 40 years, membership has been in decline in the UK, and unions' power and legal rights have been successively limited by governments aiming to restrict and co-opt the institutions that won us basic rights. So how can we get members more active and hopefully winning more, essentially? Starting us off with some barriers members may face in their unions and how to overcome them, we are going to hear from Clara Paillard. Clara is a trade unionist and organizer supporting grassroots climate justice campaigns, and she's the former president of PCS Union Culture Group, who represented 4,000 museum workers in the UK's national institutions. Clara, thanks for being here. Take it away.
Thanks, Amal. And just to say, I'm now a member of Unite the Union branch secretary in the not-for-profit sector. I'm also the co-founder of a grassroots network of trade unionists. We're trying to move our union towards more progressive climate policies. It's called the Unite Grassroots Climate Justice Caucus. But yeah, being involved in a trade union is not a straightforward matter. Often individual workers are going to join a union to get some protection at work, in case they face problems with managers, HR, or, losing the jobs. But being part of a trade union needs to be about collective action. And often that means spending time understanding how your union works and how you can be involved in the collective. And one thing to say at the start is that trade unions are not revolutionary organizations, and they do also reproduce structures of power and discrimination. When they first started to emerge in history, it was often just workers coming together to fight for better condition and pay. There wasn't a union apparatus, paid employees by the union, or big structures. So workers just took action after big meetings that decided here and there what to do next, often by a show of hands. And this is important because unless you show power through the possibility of withdrawing your labor, employers often will not budge. But since then, we've seen many restrictions brought in by law to restrict the use of strike action. And this is like a big barrier that, is affecting workers' power and the ability to make change. So without going into loads of details, but anti-trade union laws in these countries are very strict compared to many European countries. And to be able to strike, you've got to go through many hoops and loops, including to show that you've exhausted all other avenues. You have to conduct strike ballot by post, which often is going to minimize participation, especially at the time of online interactions. You've got to give plenty of notice to your employer to carry out the strike, which means that the employer has got time to put contingency plans in place. You also have to reballot regularly. I think it's every 6 months at the moment, but there may be changes with the new laws. And there are also plenty of restriction on picketing. So there is always this looming legal threat to workers when they want to take action. But also you can only strike on workplace issues. So solidarity strikes with other workers are illegal, making the prospect of a general strike very unlikely. And also you cannot strike on societal issues such as the climate crisis, which is an issue I'm passionate about, and I'm trying to mobilize workers around this issue. But you can involve your members in those campaigns. They don't have to be workplace campaigns. You can get union to support progressive causes and to put resources into them. And it's also possible to be creative by, for example, using health and safety regulation to organize industrial actions and campaigns around issues linked to the climate crisis, such as heat waves and workplace temperature or pollution at work. So you've got to look at the different tools available to you. But generally, most unions tend to prioritize issues linked to your workplace, employment, your contract, your jobs, health and safety. That also means that people who are not in work are often excluded from union structures, although Unite have got the Unite community branch, which are for people who are not in work. And what we can see as well is that union officials who are employed by the union to help representation, negotiation, they may have developed a cozy relationship with management, or what we can call a partnership approach. And that means that matters can often be discussed and decided behind closed doors using the idea of confidentiality, not to disclose enough information to members. And it's not every rep or negotiator that organize regular members meetings to make decisions, take feedbacks, decide strategies. So it's very important as a union member, you actually ask questions and you challenge the status quo when you feel union members are not involved or consulted properly. And also many unions offer like side services, such as insurance, shopping discounts, helplines, which isn't a bad thing in itself, but it can lead to the perception that unions are individual insurances rather than a collective action tool. And that can be seen when people have got individual grievances. Quite often those grievances are actually issues that could be collectivized, but people are just like focused on their individual situation. So unions have become huge machines with several layers of hierarchy, committees, organized at different levels, different sectors, different regions, and it can be very difficult as a member to understand where decisions are made or how to participate. So actually, although it may be a bit boring, I think it's really important to try and understand the structure of your union if you want to participate, and that may take a little bit of time and effort. So the first level I always ask people is, do you go to your branch meeting? So the union branch is the sort of like workplace traditional structure that bring all union members employed by one employer under one umbrella. But sometimes the branch can now be geographical. So you will be in your area rather than your workplace, or it can be sectoral. So different people employed in the same sector, but by different employers. And that makes it more complicated. So when you join the union, or if you've already joined, you should be told what your branch is and when it meets, or you can ask your union helpline and find out who your branch officers are. Usually a branch chair and secretaries and maybe other officers of the branch, so you can like approach them and talk to them and find out when your branch meets. Try to attend this meeting to familiarize with what's happening there and ask about the structures, because you've got a right to understand how democracy works in your union. And you should be able to bring issues that are important to you to your branch meeting, whether they are workplace related or they are, external societal campaign, social justice or climate justice. You can ask your secretary to put it on the agenda, or usually you need to bring like a motion to the meeting. And motions usually describe an issue and the problem, and they make recommendation of what to do about it. We see so many motions that, rant about an issue, but haven't got any instruction about what are we doing about it. So that motion should be debated in your branch voted through, and follow-up action should be taken, although you may have to chase it up because sometimes, it just ends up being parked and nothing is done about it. And the branch meeting will also be an area where you can take motions to escalate them into the higher structure of your union. And it's very nebulous but usually the union constitution should give you the clues about how the structure works. So often you've got regional committees, sector committees, both at regional, national level. You will have an executive committee at the top, but also most unions have got equality structures. And that the aim is to involve more women, young people, disabled workers, Black and brown workers, LGBT plus workers. And that can be a good way to become more involved. Each of those structures will have committees meeting, conferences where decisions are made, and all unions also got a general conference or a congress that decide on policies of the union. So, for example, a couple of years ago, I submitted a motion to my branch about the issue of fossil fuel extraction and the need to curb it. The motion was then taken to my sector regional committee and then sent to the national conference and was debated there. We did lose, but that's another story. So yeah, motion can be about workplace and employment issue, but also about social and societal issue. Because unions can lobby governments, they can run campaigns to make social gains, and often international issues are also discussed, motion brought forward to the structures. You can affiliate to organization, make donations, and publicize campaigns. So the group of grassroots trade unionists that I belong to in Unite, we also try to promote the model of workers' assemblies to create new spaces for workers' discussion and strategy on the issue of the climate crisis and just transition. Because in the existing structures, we never get the time to discuss those properly. They're always at the back of the agenda. We're rushing through, or they're just motion that escalate into arguments. And, but yeah, I think at the time, the union leadership views this as an attempt to go around existing structure, and that's been thrown in the long grass, but that's something we're definitely going to pursue. Just to conclude, I mean, it is clear that most unions need change in the democratic structures of our unions. This is a barrier for members to be involved. They do reflect the old model of employment, which was like big workplaces with lots of workers in the same site, and they're often not adequate for precarious workers, migrant workers, mothers and carers, or young people. It's also important to work cross-sector and not end up being siloed in our little areas, and to work cross-unions as well. And currently, the main arena where this can happen is via the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, which is even more problematic than unions themselves when it comes to grassroots participation. And it's too often officials and employees of the unions who have power on how to direct resources and priorities. So democratizing our union, for me, is a key task ahead of us if we want real progress. And we do need you because it started at the grassroots.
Clara, thank you so much for that intervention. There's a lot to unpack there. I hope we'll get to some of that in the discussion. But next up, we've got Max O'Donnell Savage. Max is a workplace rep and chair of the union branch in the Education Centre. He's a member of Unite National Executive Council, representing and having been elected by members in the Southeast region. Max, take it away.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me. Just a disclaimer, I'm moving this week, so I've been moving boxes all day, so my head's a little bit rattled, so bear with me if I'm a little bit incoherent or I jump around a little bit. I think, yeah, Clara was fantastic. I feel like not stealing my thunder in it, but it's my brain's still going over what she was saying, because I think I think I might approach kind of union democracy from a slightly different angle, which is so uh I'm in Unite. We've got 1.1 million members. For the purposes of this, I'm just going to focus more on the industrial side because it's what I kind of know about. But we have a fantastic community and retired section. But on the industrial side, I think Clara touched on it a little bit. It's not unions aren't really like you don't join them primarily as a form of political expression. You join them because of a kind of reality of a material condition you're in. You join them because there are problems, there are issues, or you have a belief that you can make things better. Or what we've seen probably for the last 20 years, you join them because you want insurance of some kind, you want protection, you want a kind of individualistic approach to what is going on. And I think that has been of the kind of mainstream trade unions, that has been the story for the last few decades, right? Is that unions are about protecting yourself. So everything has decayed, everything has broken down. You look at a general secretary election in Unite, one of the most important, I would say, positions in the trade union movement, you're talking about 12% turnout. Do you know what I mean? You look at my position, I always get a bit embarrassed when people say I'm on the national exec in it because the turnout's about 6%. So I don't know how much of it, do you know what I mean? How much of a claim to fame that really is. So from my perspective, I think there are absolutely barriers to engaging with union structures. But for me, fundamentally, I don't mean this in a bad way in it, but you've got to change the membership, right? So I think Unite did some polling. I think we were looking at maybe 20% of the membership potentially voting reform in it. Do you know what I mean? Like the reality of a big general union is that generally, I think as Clara touched on, it will replicate things that are already existing in society. And so I guess for me, I think there's a twofold question. I'll go on to structures a little bit because I hate structures within unions, even though I'm quite highly implicated in them. But I think for me the primary question is what is people's understanding of the world? And I think for most people, and I'm just about hanging on to being a young member, for most people's understanding of the world, it is a series of quite bad things continually happening to you. Do you know what I mean? Life just gets worse. Bills go up, the world seems to become more unstable, unfamiliar, etc., etc. We become more and more kind of atomized. And for me, what I love about trade unions is, from from a workplace perspective, is you can't move on to the next person, right? So if you're looking at kind of organizing in a workplace, say you're part of a social movement, there's an option that you can just kind of knock on the next door and you can just say, hey, do you want to support us? Whereas with a union, you're limited on what your target is, right? You're limited on who you can actually engage. So it forces you into sometimes quite uncomfortable positions in terms of having to have these difficult conversations to move people. So I'd say in terms of engaging, again, from an industrial perspective with unions, I think the most important thing for me and the thing that has kept me I don't want to say protected, but slightly protected is having a collective in the most immediate place you can. And I think Clara's got um, very interesting points about kind of a lot of our structures are based on a previous world of working where you had these big, massive industrial sites, and now we're facing more atomized kind of workplaces. But I think the flip side to that is actually they are presented as more atomized than they are. So, I live in Brighton, for instance. I think we've got something like 370 pubs, and they all a lot of them look like they're independent, but actually you have like 5 or 6 companies that run a continuum of pubs. And so, you're in this one, my pal's just become a workplace rep in a pub. And it's challenging, but you look at, these 5, 7, 8, 9 people working in a pub, and it looks like they are kind of quite alone, they're quite atomized, whereas actually the individuals having power over them have power over lots and lots and lots of people. So we've got into a position where we're understanding those kind of power relations from the kind of segmentation and the atomization that bosses have placed upon us. Whereas actually the reality is you look at you can have lots and lots and lots of care homes. The reality is there are quite key players and quite key companies dictating the terms of that market. Or you look at the bus companies, for instance, you technically got hundreds of bus companies knocking about, but you actually have these like very few overarching companies. So I think, sorry, that's a different question. I'm rambling a little bit. I've been moving boxes in it. I'm going to pivot back onto union structures a little bit. I think the most important thing you can do is just like push your luck as much as you possibly can. Because the reality is all of these structures that exist within the union have existed for many, many, many decades. And Clara is right, there is a unenviable bureaucracy. And I think you need a bureaucracy on some level because you need to be able to structure staff, you need people to do comms, you need people to do this, you need people to do that. But it is deeply constricting to the agency of individuals who are trying to make change. But the other good thing about a bureaucracy like that is they don't always kind of have an awareness of what's going on. And so I think there is a lot of room to light stuff with the kind of talking about workers' assemblies and stuff like that. In Unite, there's been a lot of very, very difficult stuff, for instance, recently around the ongoing genocide in Gaza. And one thing that I've really been struggling with you can do so much stuff that you don't need to go through structures for. Do you know what I mean? You can do so much stuff in terms of connecting with workers who work in, say, aerospace and shipbuilding that you don't need to go through internal structures. You can reach out to them. But I think among even a lot of very active people within unions, you become habituated and you become kind of institutionalized a little bit to understand structures as your primary form of agency, whereas actually probably the most interesting, engaging stuff I've seen within unions is it's a bit dodgy. I don't know if I was being on the NEC in it, but I think subversion has its place. Subversion can be a very positive thing, and I think if you're able to get things done without having to engage in the bureaucracy, you should do that. If you reach a point where you then do have to engage with the bureaucracy, one, it might be because there is a purpose to the bureaucracy, but that yeah, I think just fuck it, give it a go. Do you know what I mean? And I think the other critical thing, and it is a problem that I have seen far, far too much, that Clara touched upon is staffers within unions feeling that they have quite significant political agency and maybe do engage in discussions with managers, not with members and not with reps and stuff like. And I mean, with that, you just need to be like very brutal and blunt in it. You just never let these people talk to your managers without you in the room. And you do whatever you have to do to prevent that from happening. And I think, I think we have a long way to go, but I think what I've been really engaged with in United in the past couple of years is we've had something like 220,000 members take part in the last 2 years in terms of official disputes. So you look at Gen Sec turnout, you're talking 12%. Actually, kind of in full official disputes, you've had over 20% of our industrial membership. And it's about how do you move these people who are willing to put their heads above the parapet on kind of workplace and industrial issues. How do you then convince them that actually there's something politically worthwhile about engaging with unions? Or there are broader politics that should be brought into unions, like internationalism, like the climate crisis, etc., etc. And I feel like now is a really good time to lead off because I kind of ask the big question and I provide no answer or solution, and I kind of dob in whoever is speaking after me.
Thanks for that, Max. Really appreciate that. Yeah, again, I think there's going to be lots of things to talk about in discussion a little bit later. Next up, speaking to us about the role of smaller and independent unions in the trade union landscape is Matt Collins, who's an organizer with United Voices of the World, which is an independent grassroots trade union which organizes predominantly low-paid, precarious, and migrant workers. And Matt has previously worked for the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union as an organizer on their fast food rights campaign, and was also a workplace activist and rep for many years in the private sector social care, in both private sector social care and the hospitality sector. Got there in the end. Hi, Matt. Good to have you
Yeah.
with us.
Hey everyone, and yeah, cheers, Max, for leaving me with how to resolve the bloody climate crisis. All right, well, I'm just going to sidestep that one because I got the luxury of doing so. Because I work for a small, as Amal said, kind of spoiler alert on some of the first part of what I wanted to say. But yeah, so my name's Matt. I work as an organizer and trade union official for a small independent grassroots. Some call us a base union. We're called United Voices of the World. Um, we're just over 10 years old, and we came about as basically um, as workers, particularly in this instance, Latin American cleaners, Spanish-speaking cleaners in London, uh, were getting organised and raising their demands in their workplace. They realised that there was a real gap in the trade union movement that would help them to organise effectively to achieve the demands that they wanted. As a result, they set up, a range of smaller base unions in London. The most notable are United Voices of the World, us, Independent Workers of Great Britain, and Kaiwu, which is cleaners, and I forget the rest of the acronym. But basically, what do I see as the purpose of a union? What did these workers see? Why did they feel that they had to go their own way? What does that mean for, making your union work for you? Well, look, in the end, all a union is, as the brother and sister have kind of alluded to, is when workers come together to use their strength in numbers to make a change at work that they can't make on their own. Uh, and generally speaking, the most effective, as Clara pointed out, the most effective way of doing that is by exercising the leverage that workers can bring to bear through withdrawing their labour through industrial action. So strike, 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 basically. Um, my journey in the trade union movement's been a bit of a long and winding one, as Amala's sort of alluded to there. I became a trade unionist mostly because every job I did out of school was minimum wage and 0 hours. And I realized, fuck, if me and my colleagues in these jobs don't start doing something about this, I'm going to spend my entire working life on minimum wage in 0 hours jobs. Uh, and so we also, as is often the case, had some pressure and some problems with pretty tyrannical managers at the time. So really, my first experience of organising was in private sector social care, where we had a big problem of basically all me and all of my colleagues were on 0 hours contracts, and when the boss didn't like one of us, he would just suspend us and say, well, you're on 0 hours, so I don't have to give you any pay whilst you're on suspension. Your investigation meeting will be in 6 weeks' time. And obviously, people are not going to hang around, not getting paid anything for 6 weeks when they've got bills to pay and, families to look after. So it was basically a way of sacking colleagues through a dodgy and illegal method, which through, me and my colleagues at the time, we joined Unison. And we were lucky enough to have a very good, very active local branch. I was a member of Unison in Lambeth. Now, we were sort of buoyed up by an initial win of making sure that any worker was paid their wages whilst they're on suspension. And we got busy organising our company. In the end, we ended up with, I think, 95% density, so trade union membership across the company, across the whole of London. But then we hit a bit of a wall, frankly, because then we had members across a bunch of different branches all over London, and we came up against. We were ready. We were excited. We wanted to go on strike to fight for better pay and better terms and conditions. Um, the problem that we had is that the union we had joined, we were a member of Unison at the time, was actually not particularly interested in organising or striking private sector social care workers. So I found myself in a very strange situation where actually the biggest barrier to my organising as a social care worker was my union. Unison was sort of too big. It had a particular organising strategy for the sector, and we fell outside of that organising strategy. So what we were supposed to do was be put into a servicing branch, and as and when we needed representation, we should be happy to get it. Now, I had a similar experience organising in hospitality. We could build a large, assertive membership, but ultimately our union was shy to call us out into dispute because it was not seen as a priority for the very large union we were in. So what I found is I'd been organising as a trade unionist for a long time, but more than one occasion, the biggest barrier to my work was my union, which frankly never occurred to me was likely to be an issue, and I hadn't accounted for. Me and my colleagues didn't really have a plan for what to do if our union wasn't interested in our unionising. So this is part of the reason why I felt drawn to UVW. UVW, as some of you may or may not know us, but ultimately in UVW, if you've done the groundwork, there's a group of workers who are ready to fight, ready to strike, UVW will ballot them. Will ballot them to strike. Ultimately, the origin of the purpose of UVW is to organise primarily low-paid, precarious and migrant workers and those who have been underserved by the mainstream trade union movement. We're ready to. Another thing that really attracted me about UVW is that they're ready to fight on issues that the mainstream trade union movement has dismissed as impossible. For example, we were the first union to ever defeat outsourcing through strike action. First at the London School of Economics, they're bringing the cleaners in-house, and subsequently in the NHS in a number of disputes. Like, we're a union that fundamentally doesn't have to grapple too much with the problems of bureaucracy because we don't have a large staff. And, you can just walk into the office and shout at the General Secretary, as many of our members do, and he'll take it on the chin like a champ. Like, there's not the separation between our members and the structure of the institution of the union. Look, in terms of the bigger picture tasks of the trade union movement, we got to start organising the unorganised. Like, ultimately, we can talk about big picture political issues, but ultimately, the trade union movement is heavily ghettoized into predominantly older, predominantly public sector group of workers. And until we're ready to break out of this ghetto that the political establishment has shoved us into since the Thatcher years, we won't have the power or the reach or the influence to organise workers on society or global political issues. And ultimately, it's going to be the bread and butter issues that bring these workers into our movement in the first place, as I as a younger man was struggling to do in social care. Look, but we also need to push the boundaries of the trade union laws, which Clara mentioned are some of the most restrictive in the world. And frankly, I'll say what Max was probably unable to. We have to be willing to break the law where necessary too. Look, in terms of making your union work for you, the best advice I think I can give is first, you got whatever job you do, you got to build a union where you can, because it will just build that level of security, stability, and comfort into your working life, where if you know that the person next to you has got your back, you don't have to shit yourself about what your manager may or may not do. Because if it's not for you guys keeping the wheels turning in your workplace, the whole house of cards falls down. Uh, and you're spending half your life there. What it takes to build a union is more or less what you're likely to be doing anyway, which is chatting with your colleagues. Uh, Look, the next point is, what do you need? What do you and your colleagues want and need? Like, that ultimately has to be your starting point. And it can be as little as, oh, we want a better microwave in the break room. Strong unions have been built off of petty, like, break room concerns. And frankly, nothing is too unimportant or insignificant to guarantee to warrant you workers coming together to improve their lives, even if it's a tiny marginal amount. But yeah, what is your sector? What's the material position of you and your colleagues? Maybe like me, you're sick of being on minimum wage and 0 hours. That's a big ticket, a big issue to fight on. But maybe you do just want a better microwave because you don't want to stand around waiting for your lunch to heat up as long as you normally do. Both are as valid as the other to begin organising and fighting over. Um, but also, I would say, if you do end up in one of the larger unions due to the sector that you work in or for whatever other reason, don't make the same mistake I did. Be ready to struggle against your union, as Max and Clara have spoken about, as well as your boss. Do not take it for, do not assume that your union is invested in your issues or your fight. Uh, Sometimes you need to struggle as much against your union to get them to support you as you do against your boss. And actually, sometimes you know where you stand a lot better with your boss than with the trade union official. But with all that said, it is absolutely worth it, both in terms of the improvements it can make to your and your colleagues' working lives, your sense of psychological comfort and security, but also it is the power of working people that keep the wheels on in our society in general, and it's through the trade unions that working people can build a political platform that can conquer not just power in this country, but ultimately build a better world that we and our families deserve to see. And I'm looking forward to doing everything we can with you, you wonderful people, to achieve that. Sorry for running over time there, Amel.
No worries. Thanks a lot for that, Matt. Yeah, a lot of things well said there. Cheers for that intervention. Um, and last but not least, we're going to hear from Ali Dowling, who's an actor, coach, activist, and a member of Equity Union. Ali holds a master's in ecological design thinking and is the co-vice chair of the Equity for a Green New Deal network, which I think she's going to tell us a little bit more about. Thanks for being here, Ali.
Hey, yeah, thanks so much for having me. Really great to be part of the discussion. Yeah, as Amal said, I'm a member of Equity, which is the Performing Arts and Entertainment Union. So we're a medium-sized union of about 50,000 members. And because of that, I think the limitations our members find tend to be cultural rather than structural. The main challenges we're facing are kind of in our political and relational sort of, how do we get enough support to kind of make the actions that we want happen. But we have a clear system of member democracy and clear routes of accountability and routes of governance. So it's really about our own political organizing capacity. And so because of that, I'm going to speak to the importance, well, I don't know how relevant this will be for all of the unions, but I think it speaks a little bit to the workers' assembly thing that Clara was speaking about, of building up the grassroots networks within the union. And again, I think Max was also speaking about sort of bypassing the bureaucracy if you have to. And that's how I got involved in our union. It was very much through the Equity for a Green New Deal network, which is a grassroots network. When I first joined 15 years ago, I did go to some branch meetings. I found them quite uninspiring. It was probably conversations about the microwave, and I thought, nah, this isn't for me. I'm gonna go somewhere else. But it was really hearing about one of the campaigns that was started quite a few years ago now, about divesting Equity's pension away from fossil fuels. And I had a pension with Equity's pension. And that was something that was close to my heart as a sort of climate activist. And so I became active in the network then, and through that became much more interested in the union and its potential as a lever for like real systemic change, and how together unions can really affect change. So I found this also to be a really common story with younger members. Many members who are now actively involved in chairing committees and who are on the council came in through these grassroots networks, and particularly our network, Equity from Green New Deal. I think the Trade Union Congress, I think pretty much most of the people we sent to that were from our network. So yeah, what we've basically the benefits. Sorry, I realised I did not start timing this. So hopefully I'll work out how much longer I've got left. The benefits of the network, so like I've been saying, is that we can come together around very specific collective interests. So our union has about 21 grassroots networks representing a broad range of issues. Like we have a puppeteers network, a class network, a Welsh language network. And so some are very local and focus on local issues, and the one I'm part of, obviously, focusing on climate justice internationally as well as in the arts sector, is very broad and consists of activists from all over the UK. So one of the benefits is that we're less restricted than the more bureaucratic parts of the union, like the branches and the committees and how we operate. We're kind of like our own little community of practice that can pop up and create our own culture. And we're free in the way that we kind of organise, could be more radical in our approaches. But there is a structural limitation in that we cannot bring motions to council, which is our main sort of executive committee governing body. So the way we've kind of navigated that is that we basically have organised as a network because we're all members, we can all attend our branch meetings, and we can all be elected into the committees. So we have leaders within our network who are very good at sort of empowering other members to become leaders. And so, yeah, we've sort of successfully managed to have our members who are part of our network kind of immerse themselves in basically, I think, pretty much all of our committees. And obviously we're all able to go to our branch meetings. So we've not really found these structural things to be an issue. Like I said earlier, it's much more about our organising capacity. And that's something I'm just going, to speak to is, I think part of the reason we're successful is that I think and I'll talk about the successes that we've had. So last year, the network successfully divested our union's default pension fund worth well over £100 million into the greenest and most ethical pension on the market. I think we're the first union that's managed to do this. And we've set up an internationally recognised Green Rider campaign that's empowering our members to mitigate the ecological impact of film and TV productions through our industrial agreements with PACT, which is the trade body of the producers' trade body. And that's currently being negotiated through Equity and PACT. So that's still in a kind of campaign process at the moment, but it's kind of helping the actors and producers come together to kind of make those agreements, contractual. We also have resourced our members through political education. So we're kind of doing that resourcing work and capacity building work. And over a period of 5 years, we've been recruiting new members into the union, which means that we currently, I think, we have quite a left-wing progressive leadership within our union, and so networks are actively encouraged because of how we bring in new members and how we are actively kind of politicizing the union and kind of understand how that the union is there to lobby government and that we can affiliate with other issue-based groups. So, for example, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and there's a climate change campaign. You know, we sort of can push to affiliate and support other groups that we feel like matter to our membership. And so that's kind of how we're working. And I'd say that I think the reason, I think I was about to say this, that we kind of have been successful as a network is that we embody a lot of the principles that make, I believe, for sustainable and strategic organizing, which are kind of care, collaboration, there's capacity building I was talking about, agency and empowerment. Basically, anyone can start something. We have lots of working groups. So we have one monthly meeting, which is basically reporting on everything that's happening. It's not there for people to have a squabble about this or that. It's just facilitated as a kind of reporting on what's happened this month and what are we going to action meeting. And then the projects and campaigns that we different members are working on happen in different working groups that happen separately. And that's all sort of, done through a WhatsApp community that's quite active. So we embody sort of make anti-oppression and intersectionality sort of fundamental to how we work, and we understand ourselves as part of like an ecosystem of movements, and therefore kind of tend to the work of like deep organizing over the longer term. And we also make space for joy and reflection, and we kind of consider those things to be resourcing. So we have like socials at Christmas and things like that. And some of these, these principles are something that I picked up from the organization Feminize Politics Now, which I'm a big fan of what they're doing, which is basically talking about how the how is as important as the what. I think when we're talking about how these big how unions in general were started, it was sort of when as part of this very mechanistic paradigm. And I think as everything changes and the world's becoming so much more complex, we're realizing that we are actually living in a much more networked paradigm, and that our union is a living system and it's not a machine. And therefore, from this perspective, it's these communities of practice that will be able to shift the system and enable the system to move into like greatest levels of self-organization. So that's a very high level way of putting it, but I think that sort of explains, what I mean. So sorry, I think I've overrun there as well, but
Thanks so much for that. Brilliant. Yeah, lots of practical things and some high level stuff there as well to think about. Lots of fuel for thought. Thanks, Ali. We're now going to move into the sort of second part of the session where I kind of hand over to everyone else that's joined tonight for your comments, questions. If you have any stories of organizing or of like interactions with your union, if you want to come in, and I'm also going to invite speakers to, if you have any things that you want to say, elaborate on from what you started with, or want to pick up on a point that someone else brought in, please also feel free to chime in. I'm going to ask everyone to just like raise your virtual hand if you want to come in. You can just look to the bottom of your Zoom window. There's a react button, and there you can raise your hand. If you do prefer to type or you're unable to speak for whatever reason, I'll also be looking at the chat and I'm happy to read out your words. So yeah, over to you, Sarah.
That's better. I came into the trade union movement as an unemployed person, having just finished university in the early 1980s when my local trades council was setting up a centre for the unemployed. So I didn't come into the movement as a worker, and it was another 3 or 4 years before I actually got a chance to join a trade union, because I went on one of Mrs. Thatcher's make work schemes and cut my teeth there. So I can relate to quite a lot of what's been said by our speakers. 30 years on, I went on and I eventually became a paid welfare rights worker. So I took my trade union skills into my workplace, and I didn't really see where my own life and where the trade union movement began and ended for quite a long while. I have learned now that you do need to put a barrier up sometimes and have some time to yourself. But I just basically ate, drank and slept the trade union movement in one sense or another. But it wasn't in many ways some of the conventional stuff, because being an unemployed person and working with the marginalised people that Matt's working with was what I dealt with on a daily basis. So I was kind of a shop steward to an awful lot of people who didn't have a union, felt they couldn't afford to join a union, and went to the unemployed centre to get some of these issues sorted out. And we built quite a lot of the membership in my T&G branch from not just people in the voluntary sector, which was what our branch was there to cover, but also people who weren't working, who were carers and single parents and all those other people. But it was a very good part of broadening the scope of the trade union movement. And eventually Unite came into existence and created Unite Community, which for me was finally the movement's caught up with where my branch was at for many years and had kind of made it official, except that they've made it so official that it's now quite a pain in the bum. And this isolation and ghettoising of people and putting people in silos. I mean, Unite is a massive union. It covers so many industrial sections that it's got to have some kind of breaking down of this huge thing. But I think at the moment, that specialisation is becoming counterproductive, and certainly from a community perspective, where we do not have as many democratic rights. We don't have the right to put motions. We don't have a right to input directly. We can only do it very indirectly into the rule book that we have to abide by, and it's a source of continual frustration. We are looking all the times to break down those barriers. At the moment, our area is very, very unfortunate in that it doesn't even have our union area activist committees, as they're called. They're about to get rebooted, and maybe then we will have a way of meeting up with some of the people who are in work again. We don't have a functioning trades council. We don't have lots of the things that some other areas, and we think, oh, you jammy bastards, you've got this and this and this. So we have to make our own connections, and that is being really uphill, because GDPR, I understand why it exists, but it actually is being a smokescreen, I feel, for certain trade union officials to hide behind and prevent people who want to link each up. For example, our branch is really keen to campaign about the NHS, and we know there are lots of other members in Unite who work in the health sector. Can we actually get in touch with any of them? Well, only by going round things and joining forums like Clara's caucuses or broad left meetings and other things that happen on Zoom that are, as you said, outside of usual union structures where people can actually, well, talk to each other face to face. And that's been another thing. Our union office has been out of commission for the last 2 years because it developed a leak in the roof, and that meant that it couldn't be a venue for face-to-face meetings. And when you're used to having a face-to-face meeting, Zoom is great. It brings in people who couldn't travel, but it's no substitute sometimes for face-to-face contact. So I get all of the barriers and can relate to them. And I am very interested in furthering this conversation about how we make our unions work for us. as members. They're ours. They're not the trade union officials, which is how it's made to feel, I think, sometimes. But enough from me. I want to hear from the rest of you.
Thanks a lot, Sarah. Yeah. Does anyone want to comment on anything Sarah said there?
I mean, you should absolutely be able to contact industrial branches. So that is peculiar. And maybe we'll have a chat offline and see what we can do to rectify that issue.
Thanks, Max. Anthony, did you want to comment on what Sarah said?
Well, I'm sure Sarah wasn't wishing to hear from me because we talk constantly, and we'll be on a protest outside Ipswich Hospital tomorrow in support of Gaza and Palestine, something that happens every 2 weeks. So I'm really pleased that she mentioned about the GDPR. It's absolute nonsense that we can't let you. I'll give you an example. The Felixstowe Docks, huge membership of Unite. The so-called integrated care board, the 42 integrated care systems have access to the port, taken along their bus about how to improve your health and blah, 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 blah. But when it comes to people like Sarah and myself wishing to access the members down at the docks, barriers all the time. It's absolutely absurd, so anything to address that, Max, would be really, really helpful. Yeah. We were at a meeting earlier about the disability cuts. We know that they're not 5 billion, 9 billion. We know that 1.25 million people are going to be affected. But what came out, and this was a Unite meeting this afternoon, it isn't just about old people, disabled people who are out of work. It's people in work. And one thing that Unite constantly fails to do is to engage the industrial sector along with campaigning groups like Sarah and I, part of Suffolk Unite community. That is a big, big issue. And when you talk about 20% of the membership indicating that they would vote reform, this is unbelievable. My background is in education. I used to be the secretary of the National Union of Teachers going back years and years ago. And I remember when we started out in the 70s, the NUT run by old white men with head teachers and blah, blah, opposing any progressive ideas. We got organised as rank and file members, and over the years, the union was transformed. Now we've got the NEU with Daniel Kabede coming out saying we're going to take on Farage. I call him Farage actually, but anyway, we know who we're talking about, and we're going to take on the Labour government. This is what every trade union should be doing. No trade union should be conned into voting for reform. So what is the attitude of Unite? Oh God, we can't be serious about campaigning on anti-racism because 20% of our members are going to vote for a racist party. These are the issues that need to be discussed amongst industrial members about why Farage and the rest of them are con men. Have they forgotten the £350 million a week that's going to the NHS if we leave the European Union? Well, apparently, yes. Have we ever seen that £350 million a week? No, we haven't. One thing that's always concerned me was about the level of pay. amongst trade union officials. I've not been a member of the Socialist Party, but I know that they had a policy that the union officials should not be paid greater than the average pay of the people they represent. We've got a problem in Unite, haven't we? There was a recent appointment of a regional official in Norwich, £60,000 a year. I'm sure whoever it is who got the job is worthy of a decent salary, but does that mean that person is going to reflect the interests of the members he or she is meant to be representing on 20, 25, 30,000? No. I think what we should have in the trade union movement, nobody being paid greater than the average wage of the membership. And that might encourage much more activity to get higher pay for the membership so that the trade union bureaucrats can join in that. I'll stop there. There's enough bits and bobs there to be going on with. Cheers. Anyway, I'll just say I got Sarah sent me an email at 6:25 saying that she was going to join this meeting, and I thought I'll join it too. So thanks for the invitation.
Great to have you, Anthony. Thanks for coming in. Oh,
Yep.
John, yes. Yeah, John, come in.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to go back to that, highlight that GDPR thing again, because it's something that I've experienced. So for one, I've got a lot of friends who are trade union organisers for other unions who are in the Unite sort of union workers branches for their respective union, and as well as like young members committees. And they've been in situations where they've had Unite staff outright lie to them about not being able to do stuff because it's breach of GDPR. So that's the thing. And then there's a similar kind of things going on in our branch, which so Andy, who's also in our branch, has just made a comment. So we had like training as reps that was basically suggested things like putting WhatsApp groups in the branch emails and everything like that when we're content a branch, and they always get taken out despite that's what we were trained to do. We've had quite a few things like that. I mean, just emails not being sent out inviting our branches, and it seems to be like quite a common thing within Unite where there's something weird going on with like communications and mailings, and often when you try and find out the reason why, you just get someone blaming a different faction of Unite for why it's like that. It's just a little bit frustrating. So I just wonder why, it's like that really.
Cheers, John. Clara?
Yeah, I couldn't see any other hands, so I'll just thought I'll come back in, and I'm just going to briefly mention GDPR and then also move us on to like other things. I'm elected on my regional sector committee, and I was told that I couldn't even get the details of the people on my own committee. So, and I think like it was Matt who said, well, it's easy to actually like meet other workers from like different sector. It may have been somebody else, I can't remember. But actually I found it's quite difficult, especially when, workplaces are atomized, or some industrial sector, they're like, quite far away. If you have got a car, you can't get there, actually meet workers. But I did some organizing with other trade unionists under a banner of XR trade unionists. And what we decided to focus on was to actually going to support people on strike when there was a big wave of strike around pay and the cost of living crisis. Our aim was to actually start conversation about the climate crisis, but we were going to bring solidarity to the strikers and hear about their issues, and then try to connect, some of the issues they were facing as people, but also how the climate crisis can affect them as workers or their sector. And I found that was like a really good way to like build solidarity and to have like sort of wider conversation with people that weren't just about, the topic of the disputes. And I think we should like probably do more of that. But yeah, there is only like limited time in the world as well where you're like struggling with your work and your domestic duties and try to also have time for yourself. So it's tricky. I guess like where I wanted to take us a little bit was to come back to some of the very important points that Matt has made around traditional unions not really dedicating time, energy, interest to groups of workers that are often like more precarious, either on 0 hours contracts or on agency work or migrant workers. And I really do think that's a crucial thing to change in our unions. When I was a PCS reps in the museum sector, and I also had this national role, so I operated across lots of different museums. We find that many of the PCS members were directly employed by the museum and therefore were represented by PCS, and we had union recognition, and therefore that's sort of like official union support. But a lot of our colleagues were outsourced, and it was generally cleaners, porters, security guards, although a lot of the floor staff were also, sometimes privatized or agency workers. And, we were interacted as colleagues, but when it came to union, it was sort of like really like separated. So what tactic we employed as, directly employed workers with union representation is that we started to develop union demands for workers in those sections that were privatized, obviously in consultation with them and hearing what their issues were, but we were putting pressure on our public sector employer to look at procurement and the type of employment that was in existence. It means like in my former museum in Liverpool, all the people employed in the cafe and the shops were never on the real living wage. They were always on the minimum wage. But because we managed to do a campaign that won the real living wage for all directly employed workers, then we also pushed for indirectly employed workers to get the real living wage. And that's something that we won. The difficulty sometimes with this type of employment is that you've got so many barriers. I find in particular the high turnover of workers is a huge barrier, because you may like involve people, recruit, do a campaign, and then within 2 years a lot of people have already left because it's such shitty jobs, or they've moved to a different employer because they were employed by a cleaning agency that work on like several sites. And if we look at the MAC strike, which I was involved in supporting, it was a brilliant campaign. It involved a few sites, but most of the reps at the time, they were either sacked or they left or they went to work for a trade union. And then you were almost back to zero, where you had to re-recruit people to start a campaign again. And I will just conclude on what Sarah have said about, the exclusion of unemployed people as well, because at the moment, most of us as younger workers, we will not work in the same workplace all of our lives. This just doesn't exist anymore, or very, very rare, and only in the public sector. And therefore, when you change job, you've got to change unions. If you've got period unemployment, you haven't got a union, or you join a community. If you are sick for a long period and you haven't got, proper like sickness benefit at work, you may end up losing your job. You may end up like be outside the union strategy. So there is no mechanism for a union to collaborate, to almost have a union membership that follow you wherever you are and, give you access to some support and some of the benefits. I'll just shut up at this stage. There was like lots of other thoughts, very interesting contributions. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks a lot, Clara. Sarah?
Yes, I was just going to pick up. I mean, the benefit of not being in employment means that you are a free agent. So Unite Community spends its time campaigning on things and going up to other people's picket lines and talking to people face to face. And that's how we get round some of our GDPR restrictions, because once we've met a person face to face, we can say, can I have your email address, and write it all down and keep them in the loop. But I used to find that the fact that, you know, there are good points and bad points of being in a very big, broad union. And we always used to say that the T&G in my day, I still call it that, even though it's been Unite for over a decade, was one big union, and you could carry that membership from one job to another in many cases. Obviously, some workplaces, you would have been the odd one out if you'd chosen to stay in Unite or the T&G. But I found it's one that's broad enough, and I used to bat off people trying to get me to join Unison, say, no, I'm sorry, I'm with the T&G, I'm staying with the T&G, I'm now the branch secretary, you've got to offer me something more to get me to change. But it is a point of people being in much more short-term, casualised, 0 hours contract. You know, we used to struggle in our unemployed centre for the very same reason. All the most useful people who would be, you know, have confidence, become activists, we would lose them constantly back into the world of work. Sometimes they would stay in touch with each other, but that is a problem, I imagine, for the United Voices. You know, your people move around so much that you're hard pressed to build a more permanent structure. But the idea is that, and I was brought up by this, we as organisers, we as leaders, branch secretaries, whatever job titles we hold, are supposed to work to make ourselves redundant. In other words, we have empowered other workers to carry on and not rely totally upon us. Though having said that, I am the worst delegator in the world, and I do end up carrying far too much stuff and promise myself I'm not going to do any more work. I'm going to encourage other people to take it up, but it is difficult because people do not feel comfortable taking these things on, and their usual excuse is that work just takes too much out of me and I don't have any spare time, capacity, money, or whatever else it takes. But it can reward you, sort of, in the long run if you're prepared to jump in with both feet. Okay, enough from me.
Thanks, Sarah. Gwen, you want to come in?
Yes, I'd like to say something about Unite Community. I've been in trade unions all my working life as a nurse, and it came to a head when I was working for a nursing trade union that I had a very serious accident and had to leave my job. And it meant that I had to retire early. And then I wondered what on earth I was going to do. And I came across, during the rehabilitation, I came across Unite Community. And I met pensioners like myself, because I was then on a pension, pensioners who you still had an appetite for activity and political change. And they worked very well in Unite Community. And there was a whole broad church of people that were coming along. Certainly in some cities, migrants have actually had free membership to Unite Community and have benefited from a lot of Unite's publications that have been, we've been able to signpost people in different ways and help them to get work or help them to bring change in their own lives. So I think it has lots of positive things. We've got a lot of structural barriers, and I mean, we're very uncomfortable sometimes about the big Unite Union and some of the decisions that come along. But we are largely funded by them, although we tend not to be controlled. We have quite a free range in what we do, and we've been able to work certainly through the pandemic. You know, we worked for the 20% uplift in the universal credit and that sort of thing. And we're now working. Energy for All is one of our projects that we're on now, and we're looking for nationalisation of the energy sector and so on. So I think you can work, and especially if you've been active trade unions like in your own lifetime, you've got quite a lot of knowledge about the barriers, and we use our area activists. Unfortunately, some of them are not quorate, and that is one of our ways that we can get motions put ahead, you see. But I think, you know, it's up to people. It's horses for courses, really. I mean, apart from that area for me, and probably for others that are on very low wages, there wouldn't be a trade union naturally around the corner for them. And it means that, you know, we couldn't elicit the change. Many of us have got years of being activists now, and it's not wasted in any way. And certainly our region, you know, is very supportive of each of the bits of the branches that we are. So I would say that, it's certainly worked for me. It's worked for a lot of my colleagues. And the upshot would have been to be in a retired section. The retired section in unions are sometimes social clubs. Others are prepared to work with Unite Community and other people to elicit change. So for me, it's been a very positive thing, but of course it's not without its limitations. We get very cross sometimes with the GDPR. I mean, I do think that is a farce, the way that it's operated as supposed to be protecting people's privacy, when in actual fact it stops you cooperating with people who would otherwise wouldn't have any links, And certainly through the pandemic, we kept a lot of links with our members to see that they were okay and what was happening to them. And, that was quite positive as well. So I just wanted to say something about Unite Community as it works for me. We're certainly advocates for change, and we can take on local issues as well. And we've taken on the issues of not everything being online, being routes that are not online, We've taken up those sort of issues as well. And as I say, the main thing now is nationalisation of energy and to get a wealth tax. So quite active. And you've got to be careful that you don't overdo it. You really have. Because no young people are coming forward. One time we tried to recruit a lot of students, and I think that would have been useful. It would have given them a taster of what unions were like. You see, at one time we used to go into schools to talk about what it was to join a union, but there's been a lot of sensitivity around that lately, and we've not been able to do that. So, I think all young people should have an experience of being able to know what unions are about, how they benefit you, and how you can elicit change. And particularly, I think we're in a good position to change, the direction of climate and that sort of thing, certainly. So we're not dead yet, and we're not likely to be, to be taking our retirement as it is. I'm 77 now, and I'm quite active. And thank goodness for that.
Thanks a lot for coming in, Gwen. John, you want to come back in?
Yeah, just on the sort of newer and younger members like joining in. I think there's like a major issue there of when people join unions. A lot of the structures of the unions are not aren't explained, and the unions themselves don't go to any effort to explain how they're structured. So there's a lot of people who will join the union, they'll pay them money and just wonder why they're never contacted. And a lot of unions don't bother sending emails out. There's never like a welcome call from like a branch officer saying this is how you can get involved. And I think often unions themselves haven't because of the generations that have dominated the leadership and the strategic structures of the unions, they haven't often moved with the times to the changing nature of work, which is why you've seen things like IWGB and United Voices of the World's sort of come about. Unite's been, although it's better than some, it's still been pretty bad at like moving into sort of like modern workplaces. There is some good work being done in hospitality, I understand, who are like fighting against the structures of the union to try and improve it. But I guess like so the broader question is, to like all of the panelists here, is what can we do to increase awareness of how to navigate the structures of the unions when often our own unions won't be telling us how, and can be quite elusive in explaining things. Often I won't find out, like to get like a motion to committee or to the national executive, it won't be explained until I've fought for like about a year trying to figure out the structures of that, only to come back and be like, oh, didn't you know this all along? Or actually you're not part of a NISC, like something that what Unite member actually knows what NISC is, unless you've actually tried to figure out how to do something and being told no, then you're getting explained, oh, this is what a NISC or a risk is.
Yeah.
But the majority of members don't understand what these structures are, and for each other union, you've got even more complicated ones. So I wonder, back to that question is like, what can we do about that when the unions aren't really helping us with this?
Thanks, John. Max, you want to come in?
Yeah, so I was just going to comment on the question of young people, because it's quite interesting, because so like the last 3 years, Unite's seen an 18% increase in young members. which is like I was actually a little bit surprised when I found that out because I do think with such a big union you're siloed, but we have been, I think hospitality, we've been doing interesting work, but I think one of the big changes is we've been like so much more active in outsourced workplaces than we were even kind of a few years ago. So like a lot of the activity happening in NHS branches now is organising outsourced porters, outsourced cleaners, etc., etc. So I think there has been a bit more of a kind of grappling with that. And I'd be quite interested to hear Matt's perspective on this because like so at my workplace we've got a couple of outsourced services. The turnover is not actually as high as you would think it would be. Actually, you have people who stay in these jobs for years and years and years, and like there is high turnover, but actually, like in a lot of outsourced places I've gone into, people have been there for like a decade plus because so much of the world of work is now kind of uh insecure in that way that it's not, it's not easy to kind of climb up the ranks in it as you're moving from one place to another. And actually, if you end up in one that's not like dead awful, there is some staying power. Um, on the structure stuff, I don't know. I think it's probably getting to the point in it where lay activists need to get together and create some kind of guide. And also, Unite has a rules conference next year, so change all the rules.
Yeah.
Matt, do you have anything do you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I mean, I would just echo the same. Like, I think to say that just because a workforce is outsourced doesn't necessarily mean it has a high turnover. I'm working in contact with a group of caterers at a hospital now, and the average length of service is, I think, 18 years, and with some outliers in the like 30 plus years. It often comes down to the strength of the team and the personalities on it. Generally, even if your T's and C's are rubbish, if you get on with the people you work with, you're much more likely to stay in that job. And also, to be fair, quite a lot of public institutions, even where they've used outsourcing to drive down terms and conditions, generally speaking, will still have better terms and conditions than groups of workers that were never in-housed. So yeah, like if you work in a university, you're likely to be able to get much more flexible access to flexible working arrangements, for example. But yeah, so ultimately, turnover can often be baked into an industry, but even then, there are pockets of people that just hang together, and those people in those groups, like like friend groups, or even just people that are so used to each other that they're like everyone they're the furniture as much as anything else in the workplace. Those are the people that you build unions with. So it's finding those people even in sectors and workplaces that have massive turnover. You can sort of use them as an anchor, as a bulwark, as a foundation to build on, really. They're there more often than not.
Thanks, Matt. Clara just had a comment in the chat there saying turnover. I didn't say turnover is necessarily high, but it's high where contracts, 0-hour contracts, or very precarious contracts. Yeah. Yeah, Clara, do you want to come in?
Yeah, I mean, unless Ali, did you want to come in? We haven't got much time. I don't know if you wanted to come back in any points.
No, you go for it, Clara.
Yeah, I think I also wanted to briefly come back on, I think it was Matt mentioning about, people are going to become active and want to fight for something that is not going well in work, rather than necessarily like big political issues that you may see like, oh, this is outside work. If I want to get involved in that, it's not necessary through my union. And that's also why that we know when the highest number of people join unions is when there are disputes and there are strikes. This is, there is no like magic formula. Is at a time of strike, you will get a lot of people joining. And so that's why we just need to make sure that how do we also equip precarious workers in very hostile environment to have those strikes? And one of the things I really like with the UVW or other independent unions is that, often like their picket line are very loud, they're using music, they really like have got workers themselves speaking out. And yeah, they don't give up and they give the full support to workers. And I think that there is definitely something to, learn from and be inspired from. I have been involved in a number of strikes. We had a very big strike at the National Gallery almost 10 years ago now. And we did have to fight the union bureaucracy to actually keep going out and keep the dispute going, to get resources, to be able to send communication to all the union members and get support. That was not a straightforward thing, but we did go around them and we were doing our own thing. It was like one of the first disputes that really used social media to reach out. But in addition, we were raising our own funds to help the strike pay. And we did raise over the 6-month period £150,000 that allowed to continue the dispute much longer. Ultimately, workers did 111 days of strike action over the 6-month period, but we did lose and they did privatize because he was a public sector worker, a public sector employer. They weren't really losing money when we were striking, and they were like more interested into applying the principle of outsourcing. And that was, also a massive come down. When you do lose, it's, after such a big show of solidarity and working together, and then you lose, that, a lot of people got burned out and sort of like gave up or left the place. So I think it's also about thinking about moments of high, but also what do we do at moments of low? And I know that when I was a rep at National Museums Liverpool, I was always doing union meetings, even if we didn't have a dispute. And sometimes, only like 5 people turn up, but it was an opportunity to get different type of problems and issues being, raised. And, some workers who may have not spoken when there was a big issue around pay or terms and conditions were like coming up with maybe like disability or race discriminations and, different sort of issues that we could also collectivize. So that was my lesson.
Thanks for that, Clara. Do we have any final thoughts, maybe from some of you who haven't spoken yet, before I close the session? Okay.
Just thank you very much for organising this and running it.
No worries. Thanks, Andy. Yeah, great to have you here. I hope you found it useful. I certainly think that that it was incredibly informative. We covered so much stuff. And I would just like to ask for everyone to share the recording far and wide. When it does come out, it'll go to our mailing list at Fuel Poverty Action. And yeah, please, when you do see that come through, and I'll also send it to our speakers. Just please, yeah, share it far and wide. It can be just a lasting resource, I think. But yeah, thanks again to everyone for joining, listening, and participating, and again to our speakers for your part in making this so informative. At Fuel Poverty Action, we're campaigning for every household to be guaranteed enough energy to cover everyone's needs of heating, lighting, and cooking. And we do that through our Energy for All campaign. We have a model motion, actually, that I'm going to link in the chat right here. that you can bring to your trade union or your branch. Ask them to affiliate to Fuel Poverty Action, and also add itself as a signatory of the Energy for All manifesto, which I'm also going to link in the chat. As I flick through Windows, here we go. There's a link to sign the manifesto. Circulate afterwards with the recording. Yes, we'll be sure to do that. And a couple of final links. If you're interested in becoming a member of Fuel Poverty Action, and also a little bit of feedback to let us know how you found this session. Please, just to close off in like a nice friendly way, send everyone off to their dinner. Feel free to unmute yourselves, switch your camera on, give us a wave and say good night, and hopefully see you at the next Fuel for Thought in about a month on the 3rd Thursday in May.
Yeah. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye everyone.
Bye, David.
Good night.
Have a good evening. Bye.
Solidarity, everybody.
Bye. Nice to meet everyone.
Lotta continua.